What's going to still be in shock to you?
Well, of course, you work so hard, and it's hard to admit failure, but sometimes that's just the way life is.
I've gone through a number of those.
Well, it's one of those days that you'll never look forward to. Hopefully this will be short, sweet, and we can move on.
Certainly hope so.
Mr. Bessey, your visitor.
Let's do this. Mr. Bessey? Bessey?
Yeah. Can't
Mr.
get this
Bessey.
knuckle oscillator to track.
Mr. Bessey,
Yes?
Bear with me, sir. Are you Arthur E. Bessey?
Yes, I am.
And this is the radio shop.
Yes, it is.
I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have many important investors to answer to, and the bankers, and the board of directors. Unfortunately, sir, you have failed to meet their expectations. So at this time, it is necessary that we foreclose upon you, and you must cease operations. Please look at these papers. I want you to read them. I want you to understand them, and then sign them, and cease operations here. You understand me?
Yes, I do.
Good.
Sunnyvale, California, the very heart of Silicon Valley. A powerhouse of research, talent, and raw guts like nowhere else in the world. Its list of technological achievements is as long as the 101 freeway that runs through its industrial core. Biotechnology, internet infrastructure, the birth of video games, the invention of the personal computer, the brains of the space shuttle, top secret Cold War research. The city's adventures in high technology are normally assumed to have started no earlier than the 1950s. But buried in this little museum lay evidence that even in the first decades of the 20th century, the pleasant little orchard town was already well on its way to electronic fame. Electricity is a discovery as important as fire and the wheel. But it would not lead to the miracle of electronics until the race began to perfect just one thing: the radio. All pioneering radio work is usually assumed to have taken place in the eastern United States. But in 1909, Charles Herald, using an arc transmitter of his own design, began regular broadcasts from San Jose. And in 1913, Lee DeForest joined the Palo Alto-based Federal Telegraph Company to perfect the vacuum tube. The late Jack Rowe was a retired engineer and licensed radio amateur who had lived in Sunnyvale since 1960. As a manager of many projects supporting the city's top-secret Onizuka Air Force Station, he made electronics his life's work. Aware of DeForest and Herald, Jack discovered another Silicon Valley radio connection.
I was helping at the Electronic Museum at Foothill College years ago when they were being evicted by the school board. And while we were packing things, I noticed they had a radio in their warehouse area that said it was made in Sunnyvale at the radio shop, which I had never heard of at that time. And then later, I had an opportunity to go to the Sunnyvale Little Museum, and there they had a picture of a building where the radio shop radios had been built back in early times.
25 years before the Varian brothers and Hewlett-Packard would launch the Silicon Valley, it had already hosted a mass producer of consumer electronics. This is the only known photograph of the radio shop that once stood at 229 North Sunnyvale Avenue. When Jack started asking about the picture's origin, no one knew anything about it. So he started doing his own research. Beyond the local library and the internet, his search took him to the archives of Sunnyvale's Historical Society. But finding the radio shop would not be easy. The city of Sunnyvale is located 40 miles south of San Francisco. The land is among the most fertile on the planet. Its climate makes it one of the most desirable homes in the world. Spanish missionaries arriving in the mid-1800s encountered the Native American Ohlone tribe, whom they called Costeños, people of the coast. The first successful wagon crossing of the Sierra Nevada mountains was led by Elisha Stevens. It brought the Murphy family into California. They made their home at the southern tip of the San Francisco Bay. Efficient farming machinery and extensive land holdings made the Murphys one of the richest families in the world. But the Great Depression and increasing regulatory complexities compelled later generations to sell off their land. The most eager buyer was Walter E. Crossman, and he was a maverick. Ahead of his time, he was a developer, as we now know the term, obtaining large lots and subdividing them into many individual homes.
Crossman invited people to come here to live among the orchards. And they came here because the work was here. Because we had two canneries. We had the Sunnyvale cannery, later became Shuckles cannery. And we had Libby's, which came in 1906 to take advantage of the fruit that was here.
January 25th, 1898. Crossman sketches this pencil drawing, which will forever define the town's layout. His vision is nothing less than to bootstrap an entire city from scratch. In 1906, Crossman buys additional land from Mary Ann Murphy Carroll. One small piece of it is a 5-acre lot that he sells to a lady named Ada E. Bessey. Ada's husband, Albert W. Bessey, owns the Jubilee Incubator Company near the San Jose-San Francisco railway line. It is here where the region's first commercial venture in the field of consumer electronics will be born. Albert W. Bessey was born in Canada. He patented a chicken incubator design that ensured consistent results with greatly reduced risk of fire.
It was a safer and more controllable method of keeping the chicks and the eggs, depending which half of the project you were on, from being damaged by runaway heat or fires. It was a hot water process versus others that were things just like kerosene heaters.
Bessey's self-regulating poultry incubators were in demand the world over.
I know there's money in the poultry business because I put a lot of it in and I haven't seen any come out as of yet. Joe, early Sunnyvale poultry worker.
The Jubilee incubator and the Jubilee brooder have been made famous because of their hot water system. And they are not only shipped in every state in the Union, but Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Africa, China, and other foreign countries have also ordered liberally. Eugene T. Sawyers, History of Santa Clara County, 1922.
Albert had a son, Arthur E. Bessey. He was known to friends and family as Art. Art was born in St. Catharines, Ontario, and was 6 years old when the family moved to California, soon to settle in Sunnyvale. The junior Bessey came of age to help in the family business and eventually joined the city's political elite. He served as the first West Coast director of the American Radio Relay League. This organization was enormously influential in the early years of American broadcasting. Then, in 1920, Arthur E. Bessey went into business as the Radio Shop. His partner was a man named Tom Lambert.
There was a Tom Lambert that was working with Bessey, and I have not found proof of what his role was, but it's believed he was probably an engineer and the technical specialist, as was Bessey. But Bessey was probably more involved with marketing and business matters.
The Radio Shop was the first end-user electronics firm in what would be known as Silicon Valley 50 years later. There is little doubt that the incubator business provided the startup money. That makes Bessey Sr. the area's first homegrown, high-tech venture capitalist. And this was their product. A gateway to the mysterious new magic of wireless news and entertainment. It was excellent at pulling in far-away stations. It was battery-powered, a necessity because home electricity was still a rare luxury. And it fit on a desktop. For its time, it was downright portable.
There's no better investment in the world.
In a Silicon Valley garage, Jack showed us his collection of Radio Shop sets and explained how they worked.
The inside of this simplest radio is just very few components, far fewer than would be in a radio today, but with almost the same sensitivity. There were other disadvantages that were inherent to the design, but they weren't important in that era.
Compared to a modern design, it is amazing how stripped down the circuitry used to be. In the simplest radios, we can easily see all parts and their functions.
It has a tuning capacitor that selects the stations if there was more than one in your area. This is part of the tuned circuit. This is the inductor portion of it. It and the capacitor that we just looked at provide the frequency selection, and in addition, the tuned coil also has what's called a tickler coil that provides the feedback path to give the sensitivity. And of course, the one tube that makes all of it happen.
To peek inside one of the more complicated units, we first used an aircraft engine inspection scope. What we saw would be economically impossible today. Costly, labor-intensive point-to-point wiring. Handcrafted, three-dimensional assembly. In contrast, modern construction is flat, automatic, and inexpensive. More like printing a book than making a model. Retired chip engineer Johann Koning extensively discussed these early techniques with Jack. It turned out we did not need the scope.
It was a little battery about the size of a small pack of cigarettes, and it had terminals sticking out the end that went into these connections right here automatically. Kind of shows you what kind of a mechanic people had to be to have a simple radio.
Because you have here, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 terminals for batteries, plus this one.
Because the detector took a relatively low voltage, and the first audio took a little more voltage, and the last audio even more.
Right.
The radio shop was said to produce up to 150 units per day. At its peak, it employed about 125 workers. Sporting a lidded box, it cost $75 in 1921. Tubes, batteries, and a speaker added another $50. Total in today's money, about $1,400. The set was quite sensitive, but developed a notorious reputation for radiating interference. Making the receivers alone was not enough for the junior Bessey. Driven by hobby and ambition, he ventured toward the other end of the airwaves as well.
The radio shop had a broadcast station. Its call letters that were assigned, when call letters were assigned eventually, was KJJ. And it was in operation from about 1921 to 1923. It's likely it did not even have a studio or a microphone. It probably only played records.
The U.S. government licensed KJJ as the 23rd broadcast station on December 20th, 1921. With 500 watts of power, it was located at 360 meters, or about 830 on the AM radio dial. A newspaper called Radio Digest Illustrated listed schedules and provided a forum for enthusiasts. In the January 27, 1923 edition, a Charles N. Schwab of Grinnell, Iowa, reported receiving KJJ from over 1,500 miles away. Unfortunately, the Bessey family's good times were short-lived. Silicon Valley's future cutthroat competition was about to be foreshadowed.
This is NBC, the National Broadcasting Company.
Radio was booming. The government had just increased the number of channels from 2 to more than 100. Picking out one station from all the others became increasingly impossible. Advertisements in the 1920s were full of remedies that didn't really work. And the more knobs, the better. An officer in the U.S. Army Signal Corps, Major Edwin Howard Armstrong, found the solution used in almost every single wireless device to this day. The new technology was called superheterodyne. It spelled the end of radio's experimental period and the end of the radio shop.
They never modernized beyond the basic design, regenerative and at best fancy cabinets and maybe some amplifiers that would drive a simple speaker.
Bessey had licensed earlier designs from Armstrong simply by buying him a few drinks at a ham radio convention in Chicago. Such days were now over. One of the first things to go was the radio station. On June 16, 1923, the Department of Commerce deleted KJJ's license from its records. And family tragedy struck as well.
Arthur Bessey's father was ill at this time toward the end of the radio shop era, and I think Arthur Bessey himself was going to have to help run the chicken incubator business, which lasted until 1930.
In a final effort, Bessey started applying the Echophone brand name. The Echophone Company contracted with a number of radio shops. It was based in Chicago, in a building that now houses this music store. Echophone later became Hallicrafters, the classic maker of amateur and military radio equipment. But the Sunnyvale operation would not make it past 1925. We wanted to see if any evidence of Bessey survives to this day. Is anything left over from his enterprise? Amazingly, many radio shop sets remain in circulation. We know this because we have seen many units for sale by collectors online. Antique as they are, they still play today's broadcasts. Unlike the computers and operating systems of today, that's compatibility spanning over 90 years.
The thing that makes radio work goes way back to about 1900 and to some extent before that. That technology is still used today. It's just the method that it's used that has become different over the years. I, for example, have radios that will hide in the palm of your hand, but the way they work is not very much different than the way they did in 1920 when the radio shop was being built and used.
We wanted to power up and listen to an Echophone radio. Would it still work? We had to go outside and put up a long wire antenna. Then we pounded a good earth stake into the ground.
Okay, put the antenna on outside.
We provided the radio with 3 separate power sources while listening through poor sounding and uncomfortable headphones.
Powered up now. Sure. And so you're on this program.
Here is hardware nearly a century old, playing today's transmissions.
Oh, yeah, that's just...
Aside from the radio sets themselves, rather little evidence remains. This tool was used to create nameplates on the units just prior to shipping. Bessey's employees wore badges, such as this one. It had a thumbprint and signature on the back, and similar tokens were used to check out tools. This badge belonged to Pete Zarko, shown here in later years. At 17 years old, the radio shop was his first job. Later, he would build Liberty ship engines for World War II at Sunnyvale's Hendy Iron Works. Pete was survived by his wife, Ann Lopin Zarko, who at age 96 remained active in civic affairs.
My husband worked there when he was about 17 years old. He got a job there, and he worked there until they closed in 1925, and assembling these little radios. You know, there's nothing really written about them or anything. People didn't have electricity even, and it was run on a battery, a great big battery of some kind.
On May 2, 1978, Pete Zarko was interviewed by June Oxford. This damaged tape contains the only known recording of Mr. Zarko.
What did you do? Well, we worked in the machine shop part of the time, and then assembly, different. Some of them had a car battery, some of them had what they call an A battery, B battery, and C battery. And you had to charge them. The large batteries had to charge every once in a while. Kind of a nuisance. Electricity came out, and the electric radios come out. And they still kept on making battery sets, but they just didn't want to change over. And
oh, so that was the reason they
eventually went under.
The interview was part of an ongoing oral history project. It had already sparked a discussion in the San Jose Mercury News. One letter was from another former radio shop employee, and it adds a bit of mystery to the firm's beginnings.
In 1910, the radio shop was on the north side of San Fernando Street, between 3rd and 4th Streets. Later, it moved to Sunnyvale. Lambert was the brains of the shop. Bessey was the financier. Frank Pratt was the shop foreman, and Mr. Brunero was the chief tool and die maker. I ran a turret lathe and punch press. Joseph D. Kappa, Alamo, California, October 24th, 1976.
We know the San Jose address was used to gain legitimacy, but we cannot explain the year 1910. It likely referred to Bessey's early hobbyist years. Another oddity is that Bessey tried at one time to disown his company altogether. In his Pacific Division Manager role with the American Radio Relay League, he was only supposed to be an amateur. Rather than step down, he publicly denied any connection, instead invoking his son, Ernest, as being nothing more than an employee. But plenty of oral and written stories implicate Arthur. One disputed source even says that Ernest did not survive infancy. We do know that the Bessey grandson died young. Within a few years, the Jubilee firm would fail as well. With untimely losses of father and son and 2 failed businesses, the depression must have been immense. Arthur spent his last 14 months at the Millbrae Serra Sanitarium, just south of San Francisco. We took a road trip in search of his final home. A list of historic hospitals tells us the sanitarium was located where this transit station is today. A facility with almost the same name still stands nearby. The 74-year-old businessman likely took his final strolls in this small park next door. He died on Friday, September 11, 1953, taking a small but significant piece of Silicon Valley's origin with him. No Bessey is alive today. Bertha was the last of the clan. She passed in 1976. While the Bessey ancestors remain buried in Canada, the entire American part of the family rests at the Alta Mesa Memorial Park Cemetery in Palo Alto, California. Ada, the elder Bessey's wife, bought a plot in 1925 for $200 to be maintained for all time. Yet the graves remain completely unmarked. No gravestone, no plaque, no memory. If Sunnyvale is truly the heart of the Silicon Valley, why did it nearly lose one of its earliest technology stories? To understand this, we have to go back to the Cold War.
We see a real display now. Roger. Okay, you did say this was going out now, didn't you? Stand by.
The 1950s and 60s. Military contracts promised a bright future, and the city wished to expand at all costs. History was literally demolished as landmark after precious landmark fell to short-sighted decisions of questionable maturity. Most sadly, the historic Murphy House, shown here in a rare color photograph. The homestead of Martin Murphy Jr., on whose land Sunnyvale is built. Before San Jose, before Sacramento, his Bayview Ranch was the absolute center of California society and politics. In 1953, the family sold Bayview to the city, having lived there for 6 generations. The state of California declared it a historic landmark. but the structure was neglected for years. A group of residents organized to persuade the city council to save it. But Sunnyvale, by now calling itself the City of Destiny, would not be stopped. Daybreak, Thursday, September 28, 1961. A front loader rips into the Bayview Ranch. California's most important home had stood for more than 110 years. Its remains were carted to the city dump within 3 days.
It was in the way of the Central Expressway, I believe, and it had not been maintained very well. And then there was a fire of which I know not why. So ultimately it was bulldozed down, and that was the end.
Someone had set a fire in it, and it was full of termites, but Mr. Vargas, Manuel Vargas, he said that termites were so strong they were holding the house up or something. He didn't think that the termites were doing any harm, but that's what they said at the time.
And Manuel Vargas said he'd stand in front of the bulldozer. I don't know if he did or not, but while they were trying to tear the house down, it was hard to tear it down. It didn't come down that easy.
And that wasn't all. Sunnyvale tore down its original city hall. Demolition actually had to wait because the construction bonds had yet to be paid off. The Bank of Italy branch, part of the town since its beginning, almost certainly held Bessey's accounts. It would become the Bank of America. Later, a nightclub. It, too, met the bulldozer. The Jubilee Incubator building still stood as late as 1980, being listed in Sunnyvale's historic resource inventory. It is now an apartment complex. The Radio Shop building, which later also served as a clearinghouse for Filipino day laborers, stands no more. These houses now mark the spot where radios once were built. A second family house, built by the Junior Bessey, does survive today as an apartment multiplex. But the original family residence is long gone. A report was commissioned by the city in 2001 to see if these sites should be historic landmarks. The suggestion was denied, but at least it was given due consideration with expert review. In recent years, the city has rediscovered its heritage, with downtown attracting renewed interest. In May of 2000, the city broke ground on the Orchard Heritage Park Interpretive Exhibit on 10 acres of land that will forever remain an orchard. And as for the Murphy House, in 2006, fundraising efforts reached critical mass for the construction of a museum with a Bayview Ranch exterior and a period interior, with exhibits, including a permanent homage to Arthur E. Bessey. Sunnyvale has taken great steps forward in restoring its soul. Still, the pace of life in the valley often leaves little time for reflection.
I like to blame it on the fact that everyone in Silicon Valley is on a dead run. And they're young people that probably just don't have time to be interested yet. And someday they'll slow down a little, or they'll retire and they'll discover that everything they were involved in has not been documented. Because history is never important until it's too late.
Doesn't she look like she's about 60?
$10.
At many city functions, Jack could be found telling the Bessey family story.
Particularly young people seem to be interested in why a radio had to be that big versus their little Walkmans and MP3s and such that they have today. And that's, I think, what makes my project interesting, is it shows people that things are different and gives them some insight into why they're different.
Maybe this story is not remembered because it's not flashy. A failed business, a lost family, a last place finish in one gold rush among so many. Yet it's so important because real history is found in the ordinary, and stories like this would soon be repeated countless times.
There's the Central Expressway we're flying over right now. The old radio shop site we're flying over right now.
Sunnyvale was almost the beginning of Silicon Valley. San Jose takes a lot of credit, and rightly so, but Sunnyvale was probably earlier on. The radio shop was not Silicon Valley, but it was, as I've called it, an echo of the future.
Jack Rowe's wish is for the Bessey story to be preserved publicly. Not only for engineers, but made part of the scenery ready to be discovered by future explorers. Today, Jack Rowe's wish is being fulfilled. The gravesite may remain unmarked for now, but the radio shop will never be forgotten. How wonderful it would be to discover other little gems of local history, just like this tale of Sunnyvale.